Okay, Tov, today's daf is daf Ches in Baba Basra. We learned for Achim basis on Sunnah Matzar Shipya. Yesterday we got down to about 7-8 lines from the bottom of the page in daf Ches and Aleph at the two dots, 7 lines from the bottom page. Amar Avasi, the Amar Avasi. It's another loch that we've already had. Amar Yochanan. He said in Rav Yochanan, Hakolafasi here, everybody must contribute to the walls, city walls. I feel me ask even young orphans. The rabbis don't have to contribute to the city wall. So the rabbis do not need any guard because the Torah protects them. Amra Papa, Lishura, again, that's for repairing the city walls, as Rashi says, the Tikkun Achoma, Ula Parsha, and for the horsemen, there was a guard who run around a horse around the city, checking what it needs, what was necessary. There was also a public worker. Ula Tarzina, Rashi says that's the head of the armory who guards the guns and the rifles, whatever arms they had. They didn't have guns and rifles, whatever they had at that time, but it's the same thing we have today. That was stored also near the city wall. And so to supply those items and the people who needed to guard them, you collect that even from young orphans. But the rabbis do not need protection because the Torah protects them. Here's the general rule: anything that you have pleasure from, if the orphans, young orphans, are getting pleasure, and if they're benefiting, not necessarily pleasure, it means that they're benefiting from this item, whether it be the wall, the guns, the armory, the workers, etc. The wall, all that is necessary even for them. So since they're getting a benefit from it, you can collect from them too. Rabba Rama Tztaka Ayasmi. Rabba, the Rabbi Rabba, he levied a charity tax at Tztaka. Ayasmi on the young orphans in the house of Bar Miriam. Amalei Abaye said to Batani Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Shmuel Yehuda learned that ain't posting Tztaka al Yisam Afilu Piyim Shvuim. You cannot collect Tztaka, because you can't levy a Tztaka. In those days, it was levied. They came around and they said, you're responsible to give so much and so much to the charity fund. Ain't posting Tztaka al Yisam Afilu Piyim Shvuim, even for a mitzvah like redeeming those who are captive. Still, you don't levy Yisomim with that. So how did Rabba collect tzedakah from these? From these Yisomim? I did it to improve their standing. Just the opposite. I did it so that they should show they're also members of the community, and people will give them respect as well. If for Hormuz, this lady, she was like the queen mother, Imer Shfor Malka. She was the queen mother. She was the mother of Shfor Malka, the famous king. That Persian king that we've discussed in many places in Shas. He was friends with Shmuel. So Imei Devar Shmuel Moka Shadra Arniki Dinrei. She sent a whole purse, like a purse full of dinar of money. L'kamen of Yosef, for of Yosef. Amra Have Leila Mitzvah Rabba. Let this be for a great mitzvah. In other words, she trusted Rav Yosef to use the money in the best way possible for a great mitzvah. Yes, Rav Yosef, mine, but Rav Yosef was sitting. Well, what's a great mitzvah? My mitzvah, Rabba. What is a mitzvah? What is a great mitzvah? The Rabbi said, meditate on Shmuel by Yehuda, since Rav Shmuel said that ain't poskin stuck on some afil lepiyun shvuim, as we just mentioned, that Shmuel by Yehuda said that you don't levy a charity tax on young orphans, even for pidyon shvuim, but even for such a great mitzvah, shma mina, that pidyon shvuim is a mitzvah Rabba. So therefore, that's what Rav Yosef wanted to use the money for. It doesn't say what happened, but presumably he used it. The money that the mother of Shfor Malka, that was her name, Ifra Hormuz, the money that she gave, and she gave it for a great mitzvah, use that money for Pidyon Shvuim. Mitzvah Rabbi. Amar le Rava Bar Mori. So Rava said to Amari, how do we know what's the source of this saying of the rabbis? Pidyon Shvuim mitzvah Rabba. What's the source? How do we know that Pidyon Shvuim is the great mitzvah? Yes, he indeed indicate that. He said you don't take money from Yisomim even for Pidyon Shvuim, and Rav Yosef determined from that when money was given for a great mitzvah, use it for that. But how do you know that? How do the rabbis know that Pidyon Shvuim is such a great mitzvah? The pasuk says, when they tell you, say, where should we go out? Tell them, Komar Hashem. Asher lamaves, lamaves. Those who go out for straight death, for being killed, will be killed. Asher lecherev, those killed by the sword, will be killed by the sword. Asher l'rov, those who are killed by hunger, who are starving to death, l'rov. Asher l'shvi l'shevin, those who go into captivity will be their lot. In other words, wherever people are going out, they're going out to die, to get died by the sword, to starve to death, or to be taken into captivity. How do we see from that captivity is the great mitzvah, the greatest of all mitzvahs? Whichever is later in this pasuk, in other words, whichever comes last in the pasuk, that's more severe than the previous one. Therefore, so he goes on to explain, cherev is worse than death, right? Dying by the sword is worse than death, and therefore, and then we say that dying by hunger is worse than dying by the sword. And dying by taking into captivity is the worst of all. Now he's going to go on to explain these things. So the first is cherev kashmi mavas. Dying by the sword is worse than regular death. It's not by the sword, right? Just a death of killed without mutilating the body. How do I know that cherev is worse than death? Either out of a pasuk, I'll tell you out of logic. What's the logic? In the case of the cherev, he's deformed. He's made repulsive by destroying you're destroying the body. So you're decapitating him, whatever the cherev was. So person dying by death, not as bad as having his head taken off. I can see from the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Yakar be'enei Hashem amavsel hachasidav." Right, the dear in the eyes of God is those of his pious ones who are the death, and the Pashra is the death of his chasidim, but death meaning straight death, not death by a bodily mutilation. Rav kashmi cherev, dying of hunger is worse than dying by the sword. So he tells you the svara first. In one case you're suffering, in one case there's not. In other words, when a person is starving to death, he's physically suffering. Death by sword is quick, instantaneous. It's not. He's not suffering for a long period of time. So that's the svara that death by starvation is the worst. Is worse than death by the sword. The pasuk is tovim hayu chalecher mechale rav. Right. Better are those who died by the sword than died by hunger. Because hunger is worse. Shevi or shvi kashmi kulam. Captivity is the worst. The kulu is the because when you're taken into captivity by the goyim, they have all those things they could do. They could kill you. They could starve you. They could, mutilate your body, cause you all kinds of sorrows. So that's the worst because you're totally within their discretion to do whatever they want. And don't we know that? Tanrabanan, kupashot staka. When you collect money for tzedakah, you got into this topic of contributions that you had to give to the city or to the community to uphold. And one of the things that they also force people to do is to give tzedakah. So it says, number one, it's collected it's collected with two people. When it's collected with at least two people, as we'll see. In other words, to show some trust. What's one guy's coming on tzedakah, you don't know where the money's going. So at least two people, one can guard the other. But when it's divided among three. We'll see why. Nigas mishnayim, shenos and shroros alatziva prophetim. You don't give any authority over the tzibur with less than two people. Now, the Gemara is going to say, what's the authority over here? You're just collecting tzedakah. Everybody comes around tzedakah, right? So what's the authority here? The Gemara is going to explain later on, because you can force them. You can forcibly collect the money. So to give some authority like that over the tzibur, you have to have at least two people. Why do you divide it when you distribute the money? Not divide, you distribute it to the poor people. It's got to be like a court. Like Dina Mamas, you're dividing up money, and here it takes the discretion of the court. How much does this guy deserve? How much does that guy deserve? Everybody depends on their situation. So therefore, you need three. Tamchui, the soup kitchen or the food distribution for the poor, because there it's even collected with three and distributed with three. Why? Why do you need three to collect it? Because you don't need three to collect it. But since it's done the same day, shekbuya v'chaluka shavim, because the collection and the distribution is the same day. They didn't have refrigeration or storage in those days. You collected the food, you gave it out that day. Otherwise, by the next day, it was rotten. So since it had to be distributed with 3, you don't want to collect it with 2 and then start looking for a third person to distribute it, to decide who gets more, who gets less. So therefore, even when you collect it already, you have 3 people, so it's ready for distribution. The food, the soup kitchen or the food is every day. Every day people eat. Kupa Meir Shabbos. But the tzedakah that you contribute is only done every Friday. As they collect tzedakah on Friday and they distribute it as needed during the week. The soup kitchen or the food collection is for everybody, all poor people, even if they're not from the city. But the charity box, the tzedakah, the money, that comes first for the people, the poor people of that city. However, but the people of the city, they can decide that the charity box can be distributed among others outside of the city also, make it like a soup kitchen where anybody can come. Or they could say that the soup kitchen is only for the people of that city, depending on the needs. They can also take the money and use it for whatever purpose they decide. In other words, let's say that money was distributed. You have this very often. Somebody died in the family. There was some tragedy, and they collect the money for this tzedakah. They go to whatever, one of those online things, charity or whatever, and cause match and all these different things all these kinds of methods of collecting money today. But yeah, crowdfunding, I think that's more for investments in businesses, but this is for collecting money for Jewish causes. So they collect the money and then they have too much. They need $100,000. They collect 125. What do you do with the other 25? So they can decide, listen, if we get any extra money, we can distribute it in some other mitzvah, used for some other mitzvah, not directly for this purpose, because it was done with that condition. That's what it means. So they can decide, the city authorities can decide how to use the money. They can also, the people of the city, meaning their authorities, can decide they can also stipulate what the measures are. They may say that, the gallon is getting a little bit bigger this year, or whatever. They could decide that. They could say that the measure of food is bigger or make it smaller this year, depending on the needs. So they have that ability. They have that right. And on prices, that's what we call price controls, right? Remember, they had those things. Sometimes the government uses price controls as a method, to deal with the economy. Minimum wages, right? They can also decide what the minimum wage can be. And to penalize those people who are not in compliance with their rules. Amar, let's go back. Pardon?
Who are these people that make that?
The city authorities, city government. The people get together. Either they come and they get together, a council or whatever, like the city here. You have the city government. They could decide how much arnona to collect. They always raise their arnona, how much electricity is. They think whoever decides, they decide that, right? Amar, you don't make any authority over the tzibur unless there's at least 2 people. Now, Tzibur says, how do we know this? What's the source? You need 2 people. Amar Nachman, we learn out from the base of Mikdash. Amar from Mishkan. The Hemi they will take the gold. They, not one. They, minimum 2 people have to collect the money, right? They can't do any authority by taking the money. That you needed to. But one person can be the gizbar. You don't say that 2 people have to do every job. This means when it comes to collecting, you need 2 people. But when it comes to distributing or deciding budgets and things like that, even one person might be believed. The gizbar can be one person. This is a proof of Panina Maisa. Umina Rebbe appointed Shnei Achan Alakupa. He appointed 2 brothers on the chair, to be responsible for the charity fund, even though 2 brothers are only like one, because it's not 2 brothers can't be 2 witnesses. Still, it's like one to show you that for belief and for trust, one person could be trusted as well. It's just that we have a pasuk indicating that when you come to collect money from the tzibur, and as we'll see, that was done forcefully sometimes, you need at least 2 people. So what's the authority over here? Aren't you just taking donations? You can force people, you can take a pledge from them. If they don't have the money, they claim, I'm not liquid right now, I don't have any money. You know what? You can force them, so take a pledge from them. Even on Shabbos where people are busy preparing for Shabbos, you can take that. Says the Gemara in the first of the wide lines. Pasuk says, I will remember, meaning I will punish those who oppress them. Hashem will punish those people who oppress other people, who oppress people to give tzedakah. So it's mashma, you're not allowed to force people to give tzedakah by taking a pledge. I'll take your car until you come up with the money for the shul building or something of that sort, right? You're not allowed to do that. So look, if the person's wealthy or not. If he's wealthy, then you could take a pledge from him if he refuses to give the money. Those people know he has money, he doesn't want to give it, he's a miser, you can take a pledge from him. But if he's not wealthy, then you may not. He compelled Rav Nasan, he took $400 from him for tzedakah. Many places we find the number arba males. It just means there was a lot of money there. It's not exactly 400. The wise men will shine like the brightness of the heaven. This is a judge who judged truthfully on truthful evidence. That's the dayan emes, not based on his own thoughts or his own reasoning, right? But rather he took the real facts into consideration and then judged accordingly. That's considered a wise man who shines like the brightness of the heavens. Those who make the rabbim, the tzibur, righteous, the chachavim be like stars forever and ever. Who are they? These are the gavei tzedakah who compel people to give tzedakah. They go after the rich people and they say, you got to give or we're going to take a pledge from you. First part of the pasuk refers to says that both things. So that's a judge who judged truthfully according to truthful evidence. The gavei tzedakah and gavei tzedakah. That's what maskilim refers to. Both of those. What does that mean? Refer to elam lamei tanokas. Those are the rabbanim who teach, the teachers who teach young children. Go man, Amarav, go Rav Shmuel bar Shilas. It's like Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, who was a great mechanech. The Rav Ashkel Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, he found him. One day he found him in a garden. He was like, he went to visit the garden. Amalei, Shafka Selam. If you left your post, you're supposed to be teaching kids now. Amalei, here's is Amalei Lav. No, I haven't left my post. Idna place right now. This is place to shine. It's 13 years. Lo Chazili. It's 13 years since I've seen this garden. I took a break. After 13 years, I wanted to have a little vacation for a few minutes. I went to see the garden. Even now, when I'm in the garden, I'm thinking about the kids. So I haven't left my job. So point is that Matztiki Rabbim, those who make the Rabbim righteous, refers to these good teachers of Torah for young children. Okay, so you've said, you know what? The judge who judges properly and a person who collects money for tzedakah, those are wise men who will shine. And the people who make the other people righteous, that refers to the Lamei Torah. What about the regular rabbis? They're not teachers of tinokos, and they're not judges, and they're not collectors of tzedakah. What about just rabbis who learn Torah? So he says, Rabbanah, the Rabbanan who learn Torah are described by the pasuk and show them those who love him, love their Rabban. It's like when the sun comes out in its might. In other words, that's a great thing about them. Tanur Rabbanan.
So Peter's saying it about himself.
Possibly. Everybody is right. The self-interest. Everybody's right. I'm sure he meant it well. He meant others. Tanur Rabbanan. Gabbai tzedakah and Rishon lifrosh 77. As we said, the Gabbai tzedakah, when they collect the money, they collect with two people based on the pasuk. Don't do it alone. Gabbai and Rishon lifrosh 77. They can't separate one another. In the same area, one could go collect money near the gate. No, they don't have to be all standing hand to hand when they collect the money where you're holding hands. one could stand by the gate and one can stand by the shop if they're within eyesight of one another. Now the Gabbai Tzedakah, let's say he's walking around and he sees some money on the ground, on the floor. Hey, there's a 20. Let me pick it up. When he picks it up, he shouldn't put it in his wallet. Doesn't look good. People see him putting money, cash, into his own wallet, will assume that he's possibly, yeah, huh? He's dipping into the tzedakah box and taking something for himself. So he said, Ella, what should he do? He found the 20 on the street, he's entitled to it. It's like he puts it into the tzedakah box. When he comes home, then when nobody else is looking, then he's allowed to take it out. A similar thing. Let's say somebody owed him money. And it happened to be that somebody owed him money personally, and the guy paid him back the money in the market. So he shouldn't put it in his wallet, again, in front of everybody, because people will think that he's taking tzedakah money and putting it in his pocket. No stuff. He puts it into the tzedakah box, and then he takes it when he gets home. What happens if the people have collected the collection box of tzedakah and there's no poor people to collect? For some reason, they're all out of town. They collected so much that they took a trip to Cyprus or someplace. They went to Chutz La'aretz. So what do you do with the money? Now the money was usually collected was in copper small coins like prutos. So that money tended to get moldy or rusty. So what they would do is they would transfer it to silver coins, right? They would change it. So if they don't have any money to distribute to any aniyim to distribute the money they collected to, what they should do is they should change it with other people, not themselves. They shouldn't start fooling with the money and saying silver, I'm going to take these silver coins and do it for themselves, because then it doesn't look good. People will think that they might be taking some money for themselves, right? Like some people here who tend to go into that tzedakah box and they're making change and nobody knows what's going on there, right? So when they make change, they should make change with other people. Go to a money changer, go to a bank or something, but don't do it themselves. Again, let's say they collected for the soup kitchen, they collected food, and there's no aniyim there to do it. Well, the food's going to go bad, so you sell it. They shouldn't sell to themselves. Because people suspect that maybe you weren't 100% honest. You gave yourself a good break. The stuff was worth $20 and you paid yourself $10 for it, whatever. So you sell it to somebody else to make it honest. Most shall tzedakah. Also money of tzedakah, when you count it, count it $1 at a time. You don't take two at a time and say, okay, 2 is 1 and another 2 is 2, because people will suspect that maybe you're keeping some from yourself. Maybe you took 2 and only counts it as 1. You should do it. I don't think it means you can't. Many of us count 2, 4, 6, 8 like that. I don't think that's the problem. The problem is when you take 2 and you count it as 1, that looks suspicious. I'm Rabbi. Rabbi said that his Rebbe, presumably Mar, refers to Rabbah, who was a pious Rebbe, Rabbah Bar Nachmani. He says, originally, my Rebbe did not sit on the mats in the shul. Why? Because he suspected that they bought those mats with tzedakah money. They took money for the poor from the Karen, what's it called? The Karen HaChesed, and took it to buy chairs or buy mats to sit on. Keeping the Shomla at Tanya, but once he heard this, we saw in a brisa that we mentioned before, that the authorities of the city or the Kupat Tzedakah, whoever was in charge, can change the usage for whatever they determine. That's what we said before. They could decide what they're going to do with the money, or what they're going to do with the soup kitchen money, or to change it for wherever they want. Then he sat down because he said they had the authority to take the tzedakah money and buy mats for the shul. Originally, my Rebbe, again, Rabbah, used to make 2 boxes. He had 2 charity boxes, one for the people, for the town, the poor of that town, for the Alma rather, one for the general charity for people outside the city, and one for the aniyim of that area, that city. Even the Shama the Omer Le, Shmuel, L'Rav Tachlif Bardimi. Once he heard what Shmuel, this is the Shmuel, said to Rav Tachlifa bar Abdimi, Avid Chakasa. Once he heard what Shmuel told Rav Tachlifi, then he made it into what did Shmuel tell Rav Tachlifa bar Abdimi? He said, Avid Chakisa, you can make one charity box for all of it, and stipulate that the money that you're going to put in here is both for the people of that city and people elsewhere. You can do that as long as you stipulated that up front. You said this is one general charity fund, as we would call it today. So once he heard that Shmuel said that to Rav Tachlifa bar Abdimi, so Imnami Avid Chakisa, he also, my Rebbe Rava also made one charity box. And he made that stipulation. I don't even have to make it with favorish come out and say specifically that I'm making that stipulation. The Ka'asi, whoever comes to me, I give out money. They come when they give me money for the poor, they rely on me and that I will distribute in however I see fit, and they rely on my judgment. And whoever needs, I give it to them. They rely on me. They give it to me. They rely on my judgment. If I give it to whoever I want without having to specifically make a stipulation. Hanu Tafchi. There were two butchers. They made a deal with one another. What was the deal? Takes out the word betray, but it's the same thing. There were two butchers made a deal with one another. They used to have a minhag. It was very nice. So one shechter on, let's say, Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and one shechter on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Not to conflict with one another, and to each one have a parnasa. Presumably on the days that they didn't shech, they didn't sell, they were sitting and learning. So they made such a deal. But they said, what was it? The choman to avid b'yuma the chavrei. Whoever shechts, slaughters, and sells therefore the meat on the day that's not his, cheats. He does that. Nikru'ua l'mashrei, will take that skin, the hide of that animal, and tear it up and destroy it. That's what's going to happen. That's going to be the punishment for whoever violates our agreement. One of them went. Of course, one of them violated the rule, and he slaughtered on the day that wasn't his. Right? So the other guy came and tore up his hide as a punishment. Also, I'm sorry, yeah, that's what they did, right? The deal was whoever violates it will lose the skin and will lose the hide, and that's what happened. One of them violated, and the other one tore it up. Also, they came for Rava for a judgment. Rava made the one who tore up the hide pay, even though that was their agreement. But it says they're allowed to penalize for those who violate their rules. You can do that. Lo hadalei Rava. Rava didn't even answer him. Amar Papa Shap Rava the lo of it. The lo hadalei midi. Papa explained that Rava was correct in not answering him at all. He didn't even deserve an answer. That's where this is what we say that you can stipulate is where there's no Adam Chashuv there to make a determination, like to be a judge. In other words, yes, you can make such a stipulation, but they made it just among themselves. Apparently there was no lawyers or important people there or a rabbi to judge the case. Here it was just two guys made an agreement between them. That's not good. Rashi says, "Lav kol kamine the masnu elabafanav." If they're going to make a condition, they have to do it in front of the rabbi. Yes, you could make stipulations. The city authorities can make stipulations. But if two individual people make some deal between themselves, it's not clear. Maybe it wasn't with a star, or whether it's just a verbal. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe it's like an asmachta. Then they're not. They don't have the authority to do that. Again, Rashi says, "Lav kol kamina the masu elabafanav." And if there's a Adam Chashuv, they should have made the stipulation in front of him to give it some authority. The Gavoy Tzedakah do not have to give an accounting of how they spent the money. Now things are different today probably because everything's on paper and computers and stuff like that, and people have to be their jobs are at stake, etc. So, but he says basically when the collectors of tzedakah give it out, and they give it out like there's a lot of people they have to give it to, this poor guy, that poor guy. They can't be expected. They didn't have papers and writings and notes and things like that. They can't be expected to account for every penny. But rather, we trust them to do that. They do the best that they can do. You don't make an accounting of guys. Stuck of a low hektish. Immigrants run the same thing with the barn. Give out money. They have workers building this in the base of Migdash. This guy's paid. This contractor's paid for the wood, and this one for the stone. This one for that. This and that. So they do it to the best of their ability. They're not responsible to give an accounting. Even though we have no proof to it, we have a remembrance or a hint at it. It says, and the people who give the money will not be accounted for al yadam. And the people that the kesef was given to them, they don't have to make an accounting. Those people who receive the money, because they're giving it out to the various contractors, the ones who do the work, they do it in trust. Even if you have an honest, trustworthy treasurer handling your affairs in your house or whatever, or in your business, even though you have a Adam Gizbar Nem and he's trusted in your house, you should still tie up the money and count it before giving it to him. Shenemar by Yatsuru by Yimnu. Again, based on the pasuk by base of Mikdash, that they counted out the money and they tied it up. In other words, even though you don't just throw the money at him and say, take whatever you need. You didn't have to give an accounting, the person distribute the money, but he should count before giving it out. As they say, what is kesef the abbreviation for? Kesef monin pa'amayim. When you give out money, kesef is abbreviation. Kesef monin pa'amayim. You count it twice. Or when you're doing somebody with somebody, giving money to somebody or taking money, count it twice. Amar Rav Huna. Both comes on saying both comes. When a person comes and says, "I'm hungry," you feed it. You can check them out first. This is where we're going to see machlokas here. That's not how we pass it. Huna says, person says, "Listen, I have no money for food. I'm hungry." You could check them out. You're entitled to check it out. You don't have to give them money right away. Say, "I need $100 food for the week." You don't have to give them $100. You first check out. You're entitled to examine and investigate and prove if he really is fitting to get the money. If he really needs the money. Of course. But here we're talking about. So we're going to see a different opinion in a minute. Food and not money. But this opinion is reversed. This opinion is that if he says I need it for food or I need food, you could check him out. Because if he comes though with no clothing and he says I need clothing, then you don't check. He says clothing, you give him clothing right away. If he needs it for clothing, if he's obviously he's got ripped clothing or he's not dressed at all, you don't check. This is Rav Huna's opinion. You could either base it on a pasuk or on logic. Person doesn't have any clothes. It's shameful. It's embarrassing. And so obviously it's a svara. If a man's walking around in his underwear and he says, "Please give me some money for a pair of pants," makes sense that it's embarrassing. So covered up rias, you should dress him, give him some clothing. So that makes more sense. Whereas it's not embarrassing when a person's hungry. It's not obvious that he's hungry. Not just shameful. So therefore, it makes more sense to give money for clothing rather than for food. Based on a pasuk. The pasuk says in Yeshaya, "Halo fros l'rav lachmecha." Behold, you should distribute, cut out or cut for the hunger your food. Now, b'shin ksiv. That's how it says in our Gemara. Rashi also had that girsa. The other Rishonim asked, actually in the farm that we have in Yeshaya, it says it with a samach, like fros is like pras, like to cut it out to distribute a small amount. And the girsa in our Gemara, the way that they have the girsa in the Tanakh is fros with a shin, which is to say, like a parsha. To examine it, to expound it. Hello, pros lachmecha. The shinksiv, prosh v'hadarhavle. First, parsha, derosh v'chakor. Investigate first. First, expound it, investigate it first, and then give it to it. So when it comes to giving food, you can expound, investigate, and see if he really needs the food. First, that's what you should do. That's how you darshan the pasuk. Whereas when it comes to clothing, it says kisira arom or arom. Kisiso, we cover him. kisira la'alter. As soon as you see him naked, you see him without clothes, give him clothes right away. So when he says he needs clothes, he comes to your door half naked and he says, I don't have any clothes, you got to give him clothes right away. It says as soon as you see him. When it comes to bread, it says a loaf pros. It says the splitting out. It says with a shin, as if to say prosh. It's like the froshoto, to darshan it, like a drosha, to expound it, to investigate it. That's all Rav Huna's opinion that we don't paskin like. Rav Yehuda Amar, Rav Yehuda says the reverse. Both can exustain, both can zonos. If he says he needs clothing, you can check it out. See if he needs. If he says he needs money for this and for his kids and for. Usually they come around, it's for doctor's bills and medicine and stuff like that, so that you can check. They ain't going to themselves. When a man says he's hungry, you give him food. You have to give him food. The same thing, obviously, he says over here, they both would agree that it's time for tzedakah. When a person says, I need tzedakah for what? You're certainly entitled to ask what is it for and to investigate what it's for. They bring you a sheet from some rabbi, it's supposedly signed on it, whatever, who investigated it. Sure, how much did he investigate? We don't know, right? So when it comes to tzedakah, you're certainly entitled to investigate. But if it's a choice, when one is asking for clothing and one is asking for food, which one is it? Rav Huna says, when it comes to clothing, you don't investigate. As soon as you see him naked, you give him clothing. It comes to mizonos, you're entitled to based on the mizonos. And also, if he's unclothed, that's embarrassing. Unfed is not as embarrassing. Rav Yehuda says the opposite. Both can exus. For clothing, you can check them both themselves. Same as far as again. Either logic or a pasuk. Same as svara. I tell you svara. I can mitzarla. I go mitzarla. This svara is very simple. When a person is hungry, he's suffering. The man's starving. He's suffering. So it makes more sense to say if he's suffering, you got to give him food right away. Whereas if he's not wearing clothes, he's not suffering. Yes, there is an Indian of covered abrios, right? But it could also be that he's a ramai and he just took off his clothes to show you. When a person is hungry and his face is blackened, etc., even if he really has money, he's a ramai, but right now he is suffering because he's hungry. Whereas with the clothing, not necessarily so. Ibay saying across, all I can do based on pasuk. Hello, pros lach rav lach mecha. Here, hello ksiv. Hello, pros rav lach mecha. Pros la alter. So again, here he says that the pros is with a shin, with a sin, a samach rather. The previous one is hello pros la rav lach mecha, and Rashi says the very Josh. So it's not clear, but the pasuk, if you look it up in Tanakh, the way we have it is pros distribute, cut it up. So he says hello pros la rach mecha, pros la alter. Because that's what the ksiv is. It's mashmar gemara that the ksiv is talking the way we have it. Because when he says over there, Omar Kra, everybody say Omar Kra, the pasuk we even though the Gemara says above in Rav Huna's opinion, B'shin ksiv. So it's right. It says B'shin ksiv. It's mashma that the ksiv is with the shin, not with the samach. Here is the lo ksiv. When he says lo ksiv, doesn't mean it's written that way. It means maybe that's how we read it. Hello pros ksiv. Hello, pros alter. Cut it up, give it out right away. It doesn't say pros darshan it, first. Even though it doesn't. The way our gears is in our Tanakh makes more sense because pros means cut it up. Yeah, you can read it with a shin. You can darshan it with a shin, but it doesn't. The way we have it, it says pros. But there's other gears. Udika grina, like we read it. You see. So according to the way the Gemara has it, the way the Gemara's gears in Tanakh is. That pros is with a shin, pros with a shin ksiv. And here he says we read it pros, not prosh, but pros, we read it that way. So the way the Gemara has it, and I think Rashi confirms that, is that the girsa that we have is not the same girsa. I heard a nice shot yesterday by Breidowitz. He says, what is this business about? The fact is that there are some small differences in various Torahs, there is slight differences. They don't change meaning much, but this what?
Codex.
Yeah, codex, right. So how do you explain that? How do you explain that? On the one hand, for thousands of Sefer Torah written over thousands of years, and they're basically all the same. So it's not like it was written by me. It was certainly given by God. How do you explain these slight differences? So he says there's a medrash that on Moshe's last day of life, he wrote 13 Sefer Torah. One was, exactly the way Hashem gave it to him. That's put in the base of English. That goes in the Aram. The other 12, he wrote for each of the 12 tribes, and he made a slight difference according to God's rules. God told him that each tribe gets a slightly different variation. We don't know what those variations are. We certainly don't know which tribe got what, but it was all Menashemaim that it got that, and that's how you can attribute for the, half a percent of differences between one Sefer Torah and another. V'hasam ksiv, and what about, so he says, so Rav Yehuda says, when it comes to mizonos, ein bodkin mizonos. Says he needs food, you need food, says alo pros l'ravach mecha. Right away, just give him just take a slice of bread and give it to him. The way we read it, pros. V'hasam, when it comes to clothing, it says kisira erom v'kisiso. When you see a naked person, then cover him. When you see it means when you understand that he's really naked. When you see that he's not a fraud, he's not a crook who's trying to portray himself as poor, but he really is poor and has no clothing, then you will be clothed. It's tiny for us, Rav Yehuda, a brisa that goes like Rav Yehuda. Amar Kasuni, if he says cover me, clothe me, both can achra. You can check to see if he really needs it. Maybe he's Ramah. Maybe he took off his clothes and left it in the car. Parnasuni ain't bokin. If he says, feed me, I'm hungry, then you don't check. In other words, when a person comes into shul here and he's looking for tzedakah, are you allowed to go outside and see what kind of a car he's driving? So when it comes to tzedakah, when it comes to clothing, you're allowed to check if we pass like that. But if a person comes to your house and says, I'm hungry, you give him food. You don't have to go check and say, you don't tell him go check. He says, I'm hungry, I'm starving. Give him something to eat. It's a nice thing. Give him a drink of water, give him something to eat. All right, we'll pick up here from the Tananos from tomorrow. It's a good place to stop right at the wide line. Beginning, middle of the last of the narrow lines, Tananos.